Confused about how to plan for your retirement? Shawn Maloney is here to help. Shawn has created the Retire Happy framework that considers more than just how much you should save. Getting information and tools to preserve your financial future is minutes away. Welcome to the Priority of Retirement with your host, Shawn Maloney.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Priority of Retirement, where we delve into all aspects of retirement planning for that happy retirement. Today we have Paul Ollinger, a nationally touring comedian, writer, and the author of Reasonably Happy, the Skeptic's Guide to Achievable Contentment. Paul has graced the stages of over 1,000 comedy shows, including major festivals like Limestone, Laughing Skull, and the Boston Comedy Festival. He shared the stage with legends like Norm MacDonald, Dave Attell, and Roseanne Barr, delivering comedy that is poignant, cutting, and full of insight. But what makes Paul's story truly unique is his fascinating previous life. Before becoming a comedian, Paul was the vice president of sales at Facebook and one of the company's first 250 employees. He led a team that drove 35% revenues, up 35% revenues, only to retire at 42, expecting the wealth he amassed would bring him happiness and contentment. But spoiler alert, it didn't. The realization led him to launch the Crazy Money podcast, dive headfirst into stand-up comedy. So Paul, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, sir. So I know we were just chatting for a minute before we came on. We have a connection. We were both from Atlanta, but you left us. You no longer reside here. Tell me a little bit about what drove your move to New York.
Well, my wife and I are hopeless romantics who make terrible financial decisions. That's why. Comedy was, my comedy career was kind of just going okay in Atlanta. So I said to my wife, I was like, what we should do? Let's triple our expenses. Let's do that. That's
smart, right?
Yeah, no, we thought it would be a cool idea to for our kids to go to high school in Manhattan. People told us we were crazy without telling us we were crazy. And our realtor in Atlanta said, well, that's something you never hear, so
Southern charm.
Yeah. So we met here 20 years ago, and from here we moved to Los Angeles, where I did comedy, and then I went back to the corporate world and worked at Facebook. And then after 4.5 years of that, I moved back to Atlanta, where I grew up. I grew up in Dunwoody, went to St. Pius, and it's always been home, and I loved it. And I got to be a part of the last years of my parents' life there. And that was a very meaningful thing. And we just got a wild hair about a year ago and said, hey, let's move back to New York and see if we can't maybe just have a little bit of an adventure through the end of our kids before we're empty nesters.
Right. Well, it's interesting. You've been around bouncing back and forth. Tell me a little bit about the backstory there with how you went into Facebook and then how that ended and how you retired early at 42.
Yeah, my career since business school, I got out of business school in 1997, and my career has been kind of this jumping back and forth in between the digital media business and comedy. I went to business school because I wanted to make more money, and I told jokes at a talent show one night, and I was like, oh, I want to be a stand-up comedian. But I had borrowed $80,000, and 30 years ago, when you borrowed money to go to school, the idea was that you would pay it back. I know that seems very naive and traditional, but that was the intent behind the borrowing. Anyway, I was very fortunate that I was able to pay it back eventually, after working at some digital media companies, and eventually at Yahoo. Had some good years at Yahoo, paid it back, then moved to LA to be a stand-up comedian, did that for 2 years. And it was one of those things where you go, oh, when they tell you it's a 10-year process, you don't really believe them. You think you're going to move to LA and people are going to be like, where have you been? Right. We've been waiting for you.
Welcome.
We've been just waiting to make you famous.
Right.
But no, it's a commitment. It's this choice to say, this is what I'm going to do. And you're not even going to know if you're halfway decent until you're 5 or 6 years in.
Right.
And so, but 2 years in, I was like, I got engaged. I wanted to have a family. I wanted to provide for that family. And so when a friend of mine that I'd worked with at Yahoo called and said, hey, do you want to come join this small company called Facebook? I thought, well, someday this company could be as big as MySpace. So that was my vision at the time. And I was very fortunate that my limited vision didn't prevent me from joining what became, one of the most fascinating companies of our lifetime.
No doubt. That's an interesting transition story there from different types of industries, from comedy into the social media world, and how successful it was. That's fantastic. Well, what inspired you to write your book, Reasonably Happy? And how does that really reflect your transition from corporate to comedy?
Well, a year ago, well, I'll take a step back. I started writing after I left Facebook. I had this experience where I hit the lottery as an early employee at Facebook, and I was frustrated with my job there for a variety of reasons that were dumb in retrospect. And I just kind of walked away without a plan. And I was happy to be back in Atlanta and to be able to be a, participant in my family's life, both my young kids and my elderly parents at the time. But I was really I had the same experience you hear about. And if there's any advice I'd give to your potential retirees, it's really figure out a way that you can envision your life outside of work before you stop working, because you think you're gonna it's gonna be bliss and you're just gonna have the weight off your shoulders. But work provides you with a place in the world, peers that sometimes can be frustrating, but are really your community, whether you believe it or not. And so there's this kind of disorienting experience that happens when you walk away from work and you have to decide who you are. So I started reading everything I could about work and money and happiness, gosh, like 12 or 13 years ago. And I started writing these essays about the things I was learning. And that eventually turned into the podcast Crazy Money that I started 5 years ago, 5.5, gosh, coming up on 6, actually, now that it's the end of the year. And it was the opportunity to explore the connection between work success and money and happiness. And I interviewed all kinds of great people who study the topic, who've had great success and then like athletes, for example, people who peak really early and then, the lights go out on their career before they're 30. Okay, who are you in that situation? How do you readjust to life after the limelight? All those kinds of things. This collection of essays, Reasonably Happy, is a rebrand. I rebranded the podcast Reasonably Happy because I really wanted to talk about happiness and fulfillment on a broader level, not just around money, but also because Crazy Money never really told the story of what the podcast was all about. It wasn't about investing. It wasn't about how to make millions of dollars. It wasn't about how to save money by clipping coupons. It was about money makes you crazy, kind of, and we couldn't think of anything else. We thought, well, someday we'll just change it. Well, we finally did 2,000 days later, and it's now called Reasonably Happy. This collection of essays is essays from the last 5 years that I've published on Medium and in LinkedIn and in my Substack now for the last couple of years. And I just collected them all together, honestly, because I wanted something tangible that I could sell after comedy shows. And managing T-shirt sizes gets complicated. So,
Right.
I wanted people to take something away from my show that was really personal and was more about how I think as opposed to some T-shirt with a catchphrase on it.
Ah, that makes sense. And I love that, in what you said. We actually, when we work with clients, we always stop and we step back for a minute before we ever talk about finances. We ask, hey, what's your retirement why? What do you want to do in retirement, right? What's going to fulfill you? What's going to make you happy? Because to your point, I mean, it's a big transition, right? You got up, you went to work every day. That for some people that define them, and now, like you said, now what, right? You have all this free time. What are you going to do with it? And how's that going to define your retirement? And so we actually have a thing where we go through, it's called the Retire Happy Framework that, we work through to encompass all aspects of retirement. So I love that comment. That really fits in with our listeners and how we operate. Cause I think it's vitally important. Money isn't the only aspect of retirement, but that's what people a lot of times think of.
And you can do all the thinking in the world and you're going to be right about some of it and you're going to be wrong about some of it. One of the things I always kind of told myself while I was working was if I quit working, I'm going to learn Spanish. That's what I'm going to do. I really want to be able to speak Spanish fluently. I took it for 3 or 4 years in high school and college, and darn it, I can't speak Spanish. And so I actually, after a few months after I stopped working, I did enroll in Spanish lessons. In the first, 6 weeks or so, all the vocabulary comes back and you feel like you're making progress. And then you have to start studying all these past tense verb tenses and like the past pluperfect and all this stuff. And then I remembered, I remember why I don't speak Spanish, because it's hard and you have to study and you have to practice. And if you're not willing to do that, you're not going to learn Spanish. If you're not willing to speak like a kindergartner in Spanish for a little while, you're not going to learn Spanish. And I realized I wasn't willing to put in that work. And so I was like, oh, maybe that wasn't something that was holding me back. I just don't care enough about learning Spanish to put in the hard work.
Yeah, right.
And that's
Well,
okay. There's other things that
there's
there's some of the volunteering you're going to do is going to end up being very rewarding, and others of it you're going
Yep.
to be like, I'm not so into this as much as I thought I'd be.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a one size fits all. Just because your neighbor does it doesn't mean that's right for you. You figure out what's right for you.
Totally, totally.
I mean, well, it's interesting, with your background and then your in humor and your perspectives on money and happiness and whatnot. What role and how does humor play in the processing of your personal experiences and with success and fulfillment?
Well, it's how I express myself. And I think there's I've been told in the past by employers, sometimes directly, sometimes a little bit more subtly, hey, these comments that you're making, these jokes that you're making, yes, they're funny, but sometimes they come across like you're complaining. And and so humor for me is kind of a thermometer on how things are going. And the tone of the things that I say, I always want to be aware of that because it's sort of an indication of, am I taking things too personally? Am I letting things that are outside of my control upset me? Um, and so I think it's a way for me to pay attention to what's going on in my head. I meditate not as much as not every day, but as much as I can. And it's a great way to see the thoughts in my head. Just stopping and being quiet and listening to the thoughts that are clogging up your head is a great way to understand there's so much going on, between our ears that we're not aware of when we're out there busy going. And so that's helpful for me. And so is listening to sort of the tenor of the things that I say. But I learned in business school that being the funny guy is kind of who I am. But I was always like, I'm going to tell a joke, but then I'm going to also say something that's proves that I did the work.
Right.
I don't want to just be a clown. I want to be a clown of substance. That's a pretty good line. I just came up with the clown of substance.
You don't find too many clowns of substance out there.
Well, there's, yeah, you don't want to be the scary clown. You want to be like the happy clown who people are like, oh, thank God he's here. He's going to help me, be more productive or fix my tire or something.
There you go. Right. Well, you had a, corporate career. Obviously, you're still quote working with the, with the comedy and all that. That's a job for sure. But from retired from corporate world, in that sense of retirement,
Mm-hmm.
what have you learned from what the realities of retirement are, from your perspective that you feel people may overlook since you've experienced some of that?
Well, it's a big adjustment. And work plays a really important role in our lives that sometimes we're not aware of until we walk away from it. And all the studies, even if you make a lot of money and can walk away and not worry about, finances, work provides you a place in the world. It provides you with the self-esteem of being productive, of helping people solve problems, of being a trusted colleague. And those things provide value for us. We all need a place in the world and we need to feel useful. And that's really the conclusion of a lot of different studies of what leads to happiness in life is that the people who really are the happiest and the healthiest and live the longest are the people with great relationships who feel like they're doing something valuable. And so I would say find a way to contribute
Yeah.
and on a meaningful, committed basis, and sometimes you can do things here and there, but the more regular, you can do it, the more regularly or kind of like in a framework you can do it and get to know the people that you're doing it with, the more rewarding you'll find it.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Well, we talk about how, work defines some people and, you're searching for that new thing after you retire. But I know you've explored this topic a little bit on your podcast and the books and whatnot. But the connection between wealth and happiness, we've talked a lot about that and people link the two together a lot. But what do you think? What surprised you the most? What have you learned about the influences of money and our sense of purpose and happiness?
Well, I did interview Sir Angus Deaton, who is a professor of economics at Princeton and the winner of the Nobel Prize, along with Daniel Kahneman. And they did not win for this paper, but they won for another one. But he's the guy that wrote. He and Kahneman are the guys that wrote the paper that you've heard, that beyond $75,000, there's no additional happiness.
Yeah, yeah.
And so now subsequent research has disproven that theory, or added, maybe you could say, has augmented that theory with additional data. And they said, well, there could be some methodological challenges to Deaton and Kahneman's research because millionaires don't return surveys, that kind of thing.
Right.
I do think uh, uh, I do think that study makes sense to me. It matches when I was broke for a few years in my 20s. I'd wake up every morning and be thinking about money before I was done brushing my teeth. And every time I went to go start my car, and I knew it was probably going to break down, it was going to be a $400 or $800 mechanic bill, and I didn't have $399. I didn't have I had very few dollars. I had credit card debt because of these kinds of things. That's a crappy way to live, man. And when you finally reach a place where you don't have to be rich, but if you're in control of your economic life, then you're not wasting all this energy stressing about that check bouncing. And we all know it's a whirl or a circle of a vortex, downward vortex, because when you bounce the check, well, that's going to cost you $35 that you didn't have to pay the check with, right? And so it's just, being poor is very expensive, and it's like geometrically stressful. And when you break out of that, your life gets better.
Yep.
Now, the new data from the guy at Penn, Killingsworth, something like that, suggests that life keeps getting better and better the more money you have. And I do think that it still seems logical to me that the curve, it might keep going up, but it's got to flatten out. I don't think that people with $4 million are twice as happy as people with $2 million. Although, having that extra 2 million is going to allow you to do things like pay for your grandkids' college or things
Sure.
like that. So there are a lot of things that money can do if you know how you want to use that money to contribute to your happiness. Because some people with that $2 million will go and blow it on something that isn't going to make them happy, and then they're not going to have happiness or that cash. And so keeping in mind, how money helps you be you, how money helps you express your purpose, that's what I believe is the key to keeping that connection between more money and more happiness.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you got to define what happiness means to you before you can utilize how money's going to help you with it. Right. I mean, to your point, is buying stuff or spending time with your grandkids more important? You go through that process, it's going to be different for everybody.
Totally, totally. And some people don't have kids, but they want to contribute to the next generation in other ways. So,
Yeah.
and some people want to travel the world and grow their outlook and their personal knowledge, and that's great. That's wonderful. You just got to sort of think about it. Some people who have a lot more money than I do have told me that their theory on money, and I've heard it from other places too, is that being rich doesn't change you; it just amplifies who you are. And so it gives you the opportunity, if you're a good person and a person who's focused on others, having a whole bunch of money will allow you to do more of that. And if you're a person that's all about building up your own personal image, and you're in the material things, well, money's certainly going to give you the opportunity to follow that road wherever it goes.
Yeah. That's what you do with the money, right?
That's right.
And for people that are looking, from when we talk to people about retirement, we talked earlier about finding your purpose and what you want to do. And, really, like we said earlier, that you do that, you define that before you figure out what to do with your money, right? Instead of just throwing money out willy nilly at just whatever for retirement. Yes, you're going to cover your needs. You're going to have your base budgets covered, budgets covered. I call that the happy factor. You have the base needs covered, so you don't have to worry about paying your bills in retirement. But after that, what's going to fulfill you? It's doing things. There's a lot of different elements of a happy retirement, and it's just not money. There's things like what you're going to do with your time, but part of that is community, relationships, sense of purpose. All those things are going to what really define your fulfillment or bring you fulfillment.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And it takes a little bit of effort. I think sometimes people think they know you know, think they're going to know how to use the money. Like sometimes giving money away, charity,
Yeah.
giving it away, you think like, oh, I'm going to write a check to this institution and it's going to make me feel good because I've always wanted to support it. And then either maybe there's that institution changes direction for their mission, or there's a change of leadership, or maybe you don't get the recognition. And I don't mean you want your name on a building, but maybe the
Right.
way you're thanked doesn't feel the way you thought it would feel. And they're back asking you for another donation before, the check's even cleared. And
Right.
so, you giving money away can be more challenging than you think it is, because it's more than just writing a check. And sometimes it feels great. And sometimes you go, oh gosh, I maybe I wouldn't do that again if I had the chance.
Yeah. No doubt. I'm going to change gears here just a second. So you've made this move. You lived in Atlanta, you lived in LA, you moved out to New York. How has the city influenced, your comedy, your creative processes? What's the influences there? Has that changed any?
In New York?
Yeah.
Well, it's starting all over again. The good news is I have a show in the New York Comedy Festival next week, which is not nothing. But there's a whole lot more people up here.
Yeah.
There's a lot more comedy clubs, but I was going through I was actually counting the number of comedians on one of the comedy club site up here, and I stopped counting when I got to 500.
Oh, jeez.
So, and let's just assume that I'm middle of the pack,
Right.
and that might be a generous assumption, but that means there's 250 comics up here that are better than me at least.
Yeah.
And and the comedians who are 55-year olds like I am, they've been in this market for 25 years or more. They ain't going anywhere.
Right.
So I've
Right.
got to find my lane. But I think if that's the only thing that I learn by coming up here, it's the clear recognition that you have to find your voice,
Yeah.
find your market, find your lane, and a way to express that on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, because this guy is more important than the person who books the Tonight Show.
Right.
This will determine whether or not you have autonomy. We were
Sure.
talking about economic autonomy. Well, if you want professional autonomy in the arts, unfortunately, this is the way you find your audience. And if you can't do it, you might be a good supporting act who goes there with the guy who sells the tickets. But if people don't know your name in Dallas, it's going to be the people. I was in Dallas a month ago. Great show. Everybody in the audience was somebody I went to college with, I had worked with, and at a certain point, you got to grow that pie 2 or 3 degrees of separation, or you're never going to be able to afford a plane ticket to go do comedy in Dallas.
Right. Yeah. No doubt. No doubt. Well, as you touring as a comedian, how do your reflections on wealth, work, retirement shape your themes that what you explore on stage, and particularly when it comes to defining success?
I think there's a guy named Mark Manson who's written some books. Uh, the subtle art of not giving, I'll say a toss, but that's not what it's called. That's not the actual name of the book. It's a very, very popular book, and it's about how to find out what you're supposed to be doing. And what he says is, people ask themselves, well, what do I love to do? And he says, that's the wrong question. He's like, what are you willing to suffer for? That's the question. Because when you're willing to suffer for something, that will tell you you're supposed to be doing that thing. If you're willing to crawl across the broken glass of improving at comedy, that's your thing. Keep going. When I was doing those Spanish classes and I was like, oh, this studying is hard, I don't really enjoy it. Well, that's a pretty good indication that I'm not committed to learning Spanish. And that's okay.
Sure.
Go do something else.
Yep.
And so those are the kinds of ideas, that I explore in my writing and when I speak in front of some corporations. Those are the kinds of things that I think about, and want to just be able to share those insights. Because what's interesting is when you retire, you have the opportunity to do whatever you want to do. And it's a really cool thing when you wake up in the morning and you look at your phone and you think, I can't wait to see what's on the other side of that today. And when you're thinking that, that means you've made the right choices. A lot of times I'd wake up when I was working, I'd look at that phone and be like, I don't even want to pick that thing up.
100%.
Because you know what on the other side of it isn't going to be good news. But the
Right.
thing is if you're doing the thing you want to do and money helps you do that, a well-funded retirement helps you choose what you're able to do. But when you're doing the thing you want to do, the thing you're willing to suffer for, even the bad news is in line with your goals. And that's okay.
Yeah, 100%. Well, man, it's been a pleasure having you on today. What's any final comments or wisdom you want to impart, or anything you want to say, whether it's about your shows or any parts of wisdom? Give you a minute here to parting comments.
I grew up in a house with 8 people and 3 toilets. In Atlanta, I had a house with 4 people and 8 toilets. Nobody needs a house with 8 toilets. So be careful that when you get your money, you're not spending it on crap.
Well, that's good advice. That's great advice.
No, that's a joke. And I do have I've written about that, but it's like, that's what you learn, when you think we all have these things that we grew up with. Man, won't it be great when I can get that thing? And then I'll never have to wait for my
Right.
sister to get out of the bathroom ever again. Then you go and get that thing, you get more of that thing you ever dreamed of. And you're like, oh, this is okay. This is all right. I'd probably be okay with 7 toilets.
You could have gotten by.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, man, it was a pleasure having you on, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this. All his information is going to be on the show notes. You can check out his links. Hopefully you can check out his shows and grab his book. Here's to aligning your future, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to The Priority of Retirement with Shawn Maloney. If you enjoyed the show, check out our reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more free resources to help with your retirement journey, go to retirewisepro.com or check the link in the show notes. You can also download a free copy of Shawn's book, The Priority of Retirement, or reach out to discuss working with him directly at retirewisepro.com. Thanks for listening.
Insurance products offered through the insurance business RetireWise LLC. RetireWise LLC is also an investment advisory practice that offers products and services through AE Wealth Management LLC, AEWM, a registered investment advisor. AEWM does not offer insurance products. The insurance products offered by RetireWise LLC are not subject to investment advisor requirements. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Any references to protection, safety, or lifetime income generally refer to fixed insurance products, never securities or investments. Insurance guarantees are backed by the financial strength and claims-paying abilities of the insuring carrier. This podcast intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor should it be construed as advice designed to meet the particular needs of an individual's situation. RetireWise LLC is not permitted to offer, and no statement made during the show shall constitute tax or legal advice. Our firm is not affiliated with or endorsed by the U.S. government or any governmental agency. The information and opinions contained herein provided by third parties have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by RetireWise LLC. Guests of the Priority of Retirement are not affiliated with, nor do they endorse Shawn Maloney or RetireWise LLC.